Hello, family. Welcome to JFK Today, your direct link to all things politics, comedy, and culture. I am your host, Janaea FutureCon, champ yapper and frequent nuisance in the activist and comedy worlds. Let's get dialed in. So, Oasis, thank God. Zuck sucks, and a bit on loneliness. So, we are 69 days out from the election. So you know something good had to come from that. You know something sexy had to come from that. And what we got is, after 15 years, the Oasis is reuniting, and they will be coming to America at some point in the near future, but they're gearing up to tour in Europe. That's fucking awesome. To the whichever witch or witches out there is responsible for this, well done. Well done. So, Liam and Noel are finally back together, right? They are back together after 15 years. They had a backstage feud in, Paris, I believe, at a festival. And that was it. That was literally the end. Why did it happen? Built up tension, snipes, insults. I mean, I've now gone down the rabbit hole of interviews, reporting. There's a great Pitchfork article on it, but I mean, they were actually really going at it. One person hit the other one in the head with a tambourine and then with a cricket bat. That is the kind of, honestly, sibling drama that I'm low-key here for. But, I mean, you guys, this is pretty awesome. But in one of the most iconic, the most rock and roll moment I can think of, right? In one of the interviews, Noel calls Liam a dick and a schlepper, and then Liam called Noel a dickhead, a teetotal, and a fucking priest, and then declared point blank that he wasn't rock and roll. They repeatedly shouted fuck off and talked about how they hated each other. And this was in an NME interview, and I just with John Harris back in 1994, and I was like, oh, this, if you were growing back then, which I wasn't, you knew that they were going to break up. But I just want to start off with that because I'm so excited about it. For everyone out there who loves Oasis, and if you don't, I have, to me, Oasis is actually what people pretend the Grateful Dead is. It's truly, truly good-ass music. So, if you are a fan, get your lemon tea out, loosen your vocal cords, babies, because maybe you're going to be the one to save me. Let's go, my little Wonderwalls. Let's hit it. So, Zuck sucks. What's that about? Okay, so this is before the election, right? This is before the election. We're 69 days out. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg says in a letter to the House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan, this is a Republican, right? Hard pivot, I know, but stick with me. So basically, Mark Zuckerberg sends a letter to the House Judiciary Committee that is currently investigating his company. And Mark Zuckerberg says 69 days out from the election that his company was told by the Biden administration in 2021 to take down certain posts related to COVID. He said he was repeatedly pressured and that now it was wrong to do so. So this is what the letter says. I'm about to go into why this is so important right now. Because we know we had to start out with some good news because Oasis is my Oasis. But let's jump into this. It goes on to say in this letter, in 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree. Zuckerberg wrote in the letter, so he sent this out on Sunday. Ultimately, it was our decision whether or not to take the content down, right? So let's take a moment to consider this. There is a lens where this is an absolute objective good. If you remember, if we go back towards the pandemic, when Donald Trump turned COVID vaccinations into, and really the right-wing media and that propaganda machine turned COVID vaccines and COVID into a political opportunity and really spread misinformation at unprecedented rates, did not care about who it impacted or who was dying. And we know that a disproportionate number of people of color ended up passing away because of, the realities of vaccine limitations, because of misinformation, because of pre-existing health conditions, and we know we also threw many old people under the bus. And perhaps the most impacted population outside of that, not perhaps, is our medical communities, our nurses, our doctors, our PSWs. It was a horrible moment. So it's hard not to look at the Biden administration stepping in and saying, hey, this is a good thing. It's a good thing for you guys to look at content moderation and to censor some of these voices spreading this information. This is about saving lives. And we all know that lies in science lead to deaths, right? Using pseudoscience here. And it's really been a huge breaking point for many people towards left, right, in politics. We know there's lines along gender. We know there's lines along COVID and health in general, wellness and big government, etc. But this was a big thing. It could be looked at, and it's hard for me not to see that as an objective good. Yet, right, Zuckerberg also reiterated that Meta, remember, owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Threads, right? What the Biden administration also did, and which Mark Zuckerberg also details in that letter, is that the Biden administration also asked them to suppress the Hunter Biden story, at least temporarily, right? So there was a 2020 New York Post story about Hunter Biden and that laptop, and said the company has since, and Mark Zuckerberg said the company has since changed its policies to avoid any similar move, right? Specifically, he being Zuckerberg, said Meta's social networks would no longer demote potentially false posts or stories while it awaits a verdict from its fact-checking partners. Instead, it will wait for the results of the fact checks before taking any action. But this is something that we need to look at, because the Biden administration explicitly requested that Meta deprioritize a story, right, that was critical of him and his family. This is not whether or not the story was completely founded. It doesn't matter whether or not, we like Hunter Biden, whether or not he's invited to the cookout. This is the duality of that, right? So on one hand, you have the Biden administration saying, hey, suppress this information. It's dangerous for people. And two, on the other side of that coin, hey, I don't like this. I don't want this out. This might impact my family. And you could say, well, there was an authoritarian knocking at the door. Maybe that matters, or maybe that news was distracting. But it's, again, almost impossible not to see that as a government overreach. And as somebody who's very interested in free speech as an organizer, well, maybe a little bit retired, but you get what I mean, right? As a leftist, as somebody who is deeply concerned about privacy, you can see that this was a major overreach. So how do we hold the duality of that? Right? The fact that we've got the one objective good that said, hey, we have to really slow this wide range of misinformation down. People are literally dying. Lies around science can kill people, and does. And the other side, which is, well, if you're going to do that, you could also do this. And where do we draw the line? So the other thing to note that really pisses me off about this is Zuckerberg gave the right wing a grenade, and he knows it. They're frothing at the mouth. It's hard. On one hand, you're like, who cares? Because they drive me crazy. They'll go off on anything. It doesn't really matter. But this close to the election, it's hard not to think about why he would do that, especially considering he's trying to, suggest throughout that letter that he's not somebody who's interested in politics. What's very clear is that, right, in this letter to Jordan, that was the chairman, Meta is attempting to mend fences with the political right. And this is coming up on the 2024 election, right? This happened, right? This investigation was pushed on by the Republican Party, right? It's Republican-led, because they wanted to challenge content moderation policies on major social media networks and focused on this. This has been years long. And a big part of the reason is because of the literal meritless belief that tech giants overreact and censor conservative speech. I want to be very clear about this. There's this, and you hear it every time. If you've had the great misfortune of dabbling or accidentally wandering into the red-pilled manosphere or any of these right-wing propaganda machines, you know that it is a huge belief that they think that they're being censored. And it's like, then why can I never escape your... If it's Jordan Peterson, he's crying. Tucker Carlson, he's bitching. Candace Owens is all up in this shit every day. They're the most well-funded propaganda machine out there, whether you're looking at the Daily Wire, individual platforms, Breitbart at the height of its day, et cetera. These weird pseudo-educational institutions they're coming up with that allow people to hide behind their shitty beliefs by saying, well, look, here's an actual institution that says race informs IQ, right? I mean, these are the beliefs that many of these places are touting, and they're being able to hide behind well-funded institutions to say, well, I'm not saying it. This is actually the person who said it. Well, Jordan Peterson has suggested this thing, so it's not really me, and isn't he a PhD, et cetera. So what do we do with this information? First of all, Zuck, you suck, you're trash, you bother me. At the same time, I'm very concerned about government overreach and how we're not doing a great job of understanding content moderation in light of that. So post-pandemic, we're grappling with fewer regulations and more misinformation than ever before. At the moment, content moderation is as good as dead, right? In so many ways. Right-wing propaganda is rife across the internet. And as I mentioned, the red-pilling manosphere is wreaking havoc, and they know exactly what they're doing about it. So what do we do with what we know, right? So we know that Kamala Harris and hopefully under her administration, they're going to be pushing antitrust laws, which means that there's going to be fewer monopolies, which means fewer hands and people that determine this. But honestly, when it comes to content moderation and these platforms, which are largely privately owned, we are more likely to see movement across the judiciary side. And we know that recently Google, in a court of law, they determined that Google was in fact a monopoly, operating as a monopoly, and they are going to be sets a new precedent. So what does this mean? What do we do with what we know? What I've been watching is the recent arrest of Telegram CEO and founder Pavel Durov, right? So he was recently detained in France. Because we have all these problems. Like, how do we deal with content moderation and privacy? Because we need government to enforce, stopping the overreach and criminal activity and misinformation that goes all over social media. But how do we line that up with our privacy? How do we line that up with the fact that we should be able to message people privately? We should be able to share our ideas privately, that we're entitled to speak and say what we want to say? How do we hold the line on that? So I've been following this closely. And I know that this is like one of those like weird true crime feeling moments in our show, but I actually find this nerdcore stuff very, very interesting because it has so much to do with how we experience the internet, but also what the internet takes from us and what the trade-offs are. So this guy gets arrested. So with Telegram, this is very much a popular app. It's a globally popular platform. It offers both broadcast channels, right? So people are sending text and media, and you can do it to a large group of people. Think of it as WhatsApp, right? So it is encrypted, but it has things like secret chat, right? That's your end-to-end encryption. It has self-deleting messages, which if you are somebody who is an activist, for example, or an organizer or an advocate, or you're dealing with privileged private information. So, for example, somebody needs you to send, your driver's license or your picture of your passport. Well, those self-deleting messages are really great for you, for political dissidents, for journalists. And it's been especially useful when they're working under repressive regimes like, say, for example, Russia, which was one of the inciting factors for making Telegram in the first place. But the issue is, it's been used for a lot of really wild, weird shit. Right? I mean, ISIS, It's ISIS's preferred platform. If that doesn't tell you that there's something maybe off with that, like if ISIS is like, this is my brand, Telegram is my brand, it might not be the best kind of platform out there. But what does it mean that Durov is currently detained, right? And he can only be detained until Wednesday unless he's formally charged, which at this moment is unlikely because of an ongoing French investigation into financial and cyber crimes on the app. This is one of the first times that we're seeing the potential of somebody who founded the app and is the CEO of the app who may be held criminally responsible for the activities that take place on it, right? I mean, and there's an extensive list of crimes. Like there's money laundering, ISIS, child sexual abuse material, drug trafficking, just sexual abuse in general. It's pretty bad. It's evil, actually. And one of the main issues for why this can go on is the lack of content moderation and oversight that exists on the app. But again, it's being used heavily by people who are organizing. Whether or not they're organizing for our interests is one thing, but they're definitely organizing. So how do we hold that line between privacy versus content moderation? Telegram is particularly heinous because it is laxer than other content moderation platforms. And we know most of those have been gutted. So I got to tell you, just specifically, this one got me because I was like, wow, okay. Telegram most infamously was used to coordinate ISIS attack in Paris and Berlin. But the problem with content moderation is it's mostly reactive. So when did people in content moderation, whose job that was in Telegram, when did they step in? They were like, oh, we should probably step in with ISIS organizing because ISIS is organizing and they did stuff and it's bad. So it's mostly a reactive system. So this is what Alessandro Accorsi had to say about the matter. This is a researcher of the International Crisis Group, right? This is what he told Vox. The effectiveness of content moderation is largely dependent on the platform and the resources it allocates to safety. So social media companies are generally reactive. They want to limit the financial resources dedicated to moderation. Simply put, that means they don't want to put money into it. They don't want to pay. They don't want to pay for it, right? As well as possible legal, political, and ethical headaches. So what usually happens is that they will focus their efforts on a few groups or issues for which inaction on their part carries legal or reputational costs. Now, we're seeing what happens when it doesn't exist. It turns out, unshockingly, that people will take advantage of it, right? Again, ISIS loves it. So where does this fall with the U.S.? Because we're talking about Europe and their oversight and how they deal with content moderation is far more involved, right? So in the U.S., publishers are generally legally shielded from liability over what users post. That means people like Zuckerberg, for example, he owns so much of what we use. It's wild. He's largely impervious to that, right? But that's not universally the case. If we're looking at France, if you're looking at just Europe across the board, they have stricter legal frameworks around intermediary liability. France in particular has the SREN Act, which is extremely stringent and levies fines against publishers for content violations. That means, though, that there's far less misinformation and generally far less extreme right organizing. It is harder for them to mobilize and find each other. I'm thinking of January 6th here. Right? That's what I'm thinking about because over and over again, we're seeing promises of a bigger strike, a larger attack that could happen in the event that Kamala Harris wins. I'm not entirely sure that the calls of civil war are fully founded, but I do know that there is a population of people here in the United States, largely white, largely male, although a little bit more diverse than you'd think, but 100% skews heavily male, that oddly believes that a billionaire is the savior that's going to destroy other billionaires who are taking money out of their pockets and is going to stop corruption. It doesn't actually make sense. And you'll see the deeper you go into that, the muddier the waters. I told you, don't go down that rabbit hole. It's not cute. There's no Alice down there. Stay away. But we are in a bind, y'all. Like, so I've been looking to the experts. So David Muchlinski, he's a professor from international affairs at Georgia Tech, said this: it's a really hard thing to do, especially in comparative context, because what's hateful or extreme or radical in speech in some place, like the U.S., is going to be different from Myanmar or Bangladesh or other countries. So that makes content moderation a clumsy tool at best. I cannot wait to start bringing some of these experts on to talk to live, like to talk to ask questions of, to debate, because this is one of those moments where there isn't a clear answer. And I love me an answer. I love a walk away where we got something really meaningful out of it. But in this case, I am presenting a problem. I'm presenting a problem because we are the first generation with this technology, or I should say the first generations with the technology that we have. We've never had this much information on deck before. I mean, anti-vaxxers have always existed. Racists have always existed, but their ability to find each other has been pretty limited. They've been on the fringe. But because of places like 4chan, 8chan, Reddit, right? All these right-wing propaganda machines, and now the red pilling in the manosphere, which is a bigger threat than we might know. Like, it is so prolific and so normalized, and it's casual, right? It's not a bunch of guys who are in their 20-something-year-olds saying, F these people. I mean, you're going to find that on Kick for sure. If you're thinking of an Aiden Ross or a Sneeko who just, for whatever reason, feel inclined to discuss trans people, always in a derogatory way, and always from using the, Anita Bryant-like talking points from back in the day. Gay people are sexual predators or whatever. No matter how much data you present to these freaks like this and these weirdos, this is what you're going to get. So they're not so much the problem as the casual acceptance of this really unbelievably dangerous framework that focuses on traditionalism, that focuses on family structures, women knowing their place, hyper masculinity. And yes, the vast majority of them a bunch of alpha cucks, yeah. But this is what many young men are taking in. I say young men, but I mean, we're going down to like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I love Speedy, but Speed is 1 in a million, because at some point or the other, when these guys, their job, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24-year-olds who are multimillionaires, and their job is to create and incite, antics, spectacle, right? They know what's going to draw eyes, and they're also reacting to what's happening in society. And so when you have somebody like Aiden Ross who brings out a Donald Trump, and if that doesn't give you an idea of the scale to which these guys can actually tap into culture, that's a telling thing. So we have a moment, and it's partly why I decided to do this show this way, is because I want us out there. I want us out there. I believe in us, and I don't think we're going to see any huge shifts in content moderation anytime soon. So the best way to ensure success for our side and the things that we believe, especially because we know most trans and non-binary people probably blocked each other online at this point. Like, what trans community, what queer community, what activist community? Like, when are we not stepping on each other's toes or, using the wrong pronoun? And everything is just, you're socially dead. If you got something wrong, you're socially dead. These cultures that we've got to shift. But what we're seeing is a clarifying around what a progressive is, what a liberal is, what a radical leftist is, what an anarchist is, et cetera. And but we're not necessarily leading the culture, and we're cuter, we're smarter, we're better. So why aren't we out there? I mean, yes, we're not as well funded, certainly, but I want to give us a chance. And so my best response at this moment is that it is not a useful thing to try to make these voices smaller. A lot of these, I just want to say it, dummies take care of themselves. Like there's a documentary out that's called Homegrown, and there's a good article in The Guardian if you want to check it. Just like not the film itself, but just a little write-up where the director follows around several people from January 6th. Of the several people, of all men for the most part, at least in the article, several like the key ones were all incarcerated. They were so all up in the Like the way that they were like, I'm being filmed and that's amazing. I'm being filmed doing crimes, and thought that they were going to be just fine. And then like the FBI was like, no, you're going to jail for 12 years. That's what's going to happen. That's what happens when you storm the Capitol, which is what they did. A lot of them take care of themselves. I mean, if I look at the Tate brothers right now, because so much of what they run on is based on exploiting or hating people, hating women. But a lot of them aren't. A lot of them aren't. And if you're listening to what the guy said who directed that film, who spent time with these, this problem is not going away anytime soon. The spread of misinformation, the spread of hate, the spread of bigoted ideas, and the idea that women don't deserve anything, should know their place, trans and gay people, queer people should not exist, etc. Now, I might say that jokingly, but I don't actually believe it. I don't believe it. And part of the reason why I think now is the time, it's not just because we ought to, because of our beliefs, we ought to champion each other. It's because we're all very lonely right now. Are you lonely? Do you feel loneliness? Because if I'm reading the data, well, we're more lonely than we've ever been in our lives, like in our lifetime, right? This is just based on data. And why are we seeing over and over again that there's an epidemic, and we're hearing an epidemic of loneliness? That's because there is one. It's become so urgent in this country. And by the way, loneliness is part of how we are easily streamlined towards extremism, right? It's not so much that everyday guys are just like, oh, I hate these people, but it's itching a part of their brain, that loneliness thing and that little weird bit of entitlement thing where it's like, why didn't my life turn out the way I wanted it to? And I think many of us could identify with that on some level, right? But what I do know, the way that I know that the universal language of humanity is just as much pain as it is laughter, is that we are lonely. And it doesn't matter if you're married. It doesn't matter if you're raising children. It doesn't matter if you have a deep friend group, or if you're standing in a mall full of people. We are lonelier than we've ever been. So much so that even WHO is stepping up and is just like, whoa, the World Health Organization is like, whoa, it's not diabetes and it's not, obesity. Those are their determinants for, what were the, most urgent epidemics. It's actually loneliness. And the thing that's shifted and why we need to pay attention to some of this discourse is, A, we're feeling it. And it's actually responsible for so much of what we're seeing happening in the States and really across the West. But because there's actual empirical data that says, hey, it's not just some weird random feeling. This is reshaping how your brain moves. You know how it took a while for us to understand mental health and the ways in which, depression, for example, was actually a clinical issue. So is loneliness. And part of the reason why I made this show with you all is because I know that feeling too. I have that feeling too. I feel it intimately often, and I thought, I don't want to feel this anymore. We're never going to get rid of it entirely. But what does it mean that we're all lonely, and why? We want to immediately blame technology, and I think that's true. I mean, there's now historical data. There's so many books out. There's actually a good article in the New York Times that just breaks down several books that have recently come out that sort of historicize and document loneliness as a growing reality as technology grows. But it also shows, and this is the upswing that I'm most interested in, y'all, that also shows that with that, oh my God, sorry, I paused because I just saw a roach. Okay, hold on, that's so stressful. Okay, I'm good. It's okay. It's very hot outside and I'm in a studio, so don't worry, y'all. It's not in my house. I'm not in my roach era. But, there's always an upswing because we do recalibrate, but this is unprecedented. What every expert is saying is, hey, this is actually an unprecedented moment. So what is loneliness and why do we feel it even when we're around people? If I had to summarize every book that I've read and every article that I've read about it from every doctor and every expert and every psychotherapist and everything else, it is a longing to be understood. It's a longing for meaning. And can you imagine that this society, that's what it takes from us first. It takes from us a sense of purpose. It takes from us a personality. And so it's so hard to trust that you can actually be understood. And then the dangers of loneliness is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where we're so anxious and so afraid that we aren't going to be understood, that we actually just run from it. We run from connection. We run from understanding. I am a person who is very socially anxious. I'm happiest on a stage because I'm in control of the conversation. Yes, I actually do love stage work. But I had to realize, social interactions make me very anxious. I want to be better at that. So what do we do with this? What's the upswing like? First, let me tell you a little funny story. I took some advice because, I'm doing a lot of clickety-clack and a lot of yappity-yap and not so much movement. I decided, okay, sport is something I always fall back on. Boxing can be a very individual sport when you're only training. So my friend KR and I, we decided to jump into, we decided to just get into basketball. So we signed up for Lambda. And let me tell y'all. Okay, so first we decided we were going to play in the all gender, which is not exactly what it sounds like. The all gender was just a bunch of gay dudes, which is totally fine, except these weren't like regular sized gay dudes. Okay. These were like the ones that we're sending out on the first line when we go to war. These are like jacked, in shape, large Herculean men. I am a little guy. Okay. But my friend KR is sample sized. Okay. That's a sample sized individual, a regular size. I'm a preemie. I got preemie lungs. So we both chickened out. We were like, no, fuck this. We went to the other side. And by accident joined because we thought it was something else. And, they said women's plus, and we thought the plus was more plussy than it was. But no, we're just in a league of lesbians by accident, and we're not lesbians. And it's just, oh, man. Yeah. And I'm extremely competitive when I play. I don't play casually. And, I can be off-putting for that reason alone. I mean, for anybody out there that's talking about fear of trans women and strength or whatever, or if we're still on that nonsense, I mean, I snatched that ball out of a trans girl's hands. I mean, it was ruthless, okay? There was nothing there. I'm telling you, I snatched the shit right out of her. I took that ball and I was ready to fight if it came down to it, but it's all fake, you guys. It's all fake news, okay? Because let me tell you, there was no competition. Anyway, it was embarrassing. We're embarrassed. We don't know where we fit. we had to be okay with probably being the worst people on the other side of the fence. But those stories are great. And I think we do need to get out of our little holes a little bit more readily. But don't underestimate the power of what we're doing with each other right now, because this is the kind of community that I'm interested in building. This is only the beginning. And I truly believe in what we're doing. And guess what? If you're lonely and I'm lonely, that means we're lonely together. And there's something in that. There's something in that. So here's to us, building it out more, taking more risks, putting ourselves out there just a little bit more. Don't get caught up in this self-fulfilling prophecy. No one's ever going to get it right. But what I discovered at my loneliest point was try being for other people what you need most. That's what I try to do. And if you're like me, you're at a weird age maybe, where I'm a millennial and people's worldviews. I'm at an age where people are, they're married, they got kids, they got high demanding jobs. I don't really know that many people, you guys. I'm like exaggerating just a bit to connect with you, but I do know some. But their worldview is shrinking a little bit. And, it makes it harder to feel connected to. So I got to put myself out there a little more, push harder to stay connected to them because they matter to me and I matter to them. And it's a thing that you kind of got to constantly work at. Anyway, big believer in us. I'm probably going to get smashed and covered in male sweat by a bunch of gay men who play basketball bigger than I do, but I'm going to kill them with my 3-point shot. I promise you. Anyway, that's the little diatribe for today. Why don't we hit that VM and find out what that question is?
I'm Ivan, and I go to school at Five Keys. I'm from Los Angeles, South Central. And which one of your favorite movies?
Oof. Good question. I can't think of a single one. I'll just say this. If I'm thinking of a genre of film that dabbles a little bit in the supernatural and also a little bit in just the family-oriented place, simply because we talked about loneliness, I think, obviously, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And if we're just going back in time, Little Miss Sunshine, Family man, if you need something that makes you feel a little bit warm and fuzzy, and that there's other worlds out there, other lives, parallel yous that you want to tap into and touch, those are great films to get to. What a great question. What a great episode. I have so much more to say on everything, but thanks for getting through this one with me, because I know it can get a little, but I got to bring y'all the news first. That's the point of being a news bestie. So with that, thank you so much for listening to JFK Today. It means the world to me. So do you. This show really is a labor of love. New episodes are dropping 4 times a week. We're available everywhere podcasts are streaming. I want to hear from you. Send your voice note questions to jfktodayShow@gmail.com. Shout out to KR and the JFK team, and shout out to you, the listeners that make this all possible. Sending so much love out there. You're not alone. Peace.